1. My first job was at a local nursing home. It was small with a max capacity of 100 residents. I worked in the kitchen as a cook. I would arrive at noon and help clean up the lunch dishes. Then the AM staff left, and I would be there alone for a few hours preparing supper, until the aide came in to get the drinks ready. Now for the super boring details. We would serve supper at 5 p.m. and then load up these big carts, like you see in hospitals, with the meals for the residents in the locked unit. After delivering those, we would take a break for a half hour to eat, and then start cleaning up. By the time we were done cleaning up the kitchen and dining room dishes, the carts would come back from the unit, and we'd wash all of those as well. Then at the end of the night, we would take the unit's used cups and freshly wrapped silverware back to their kitchenettes. At the time, we were having an issue with the nurses' aides coming into the kitchen and helping themselves to things, so we were locking the doors any time we left. There were 3 doors, 2 from the dining room, 1 to the dish room, 1 to the kitchen, and 1 door in the back, which had a bell on it since it was the service door. All 3 were locked, and we had the only key. So the aide and I get back from delivering to the unit, and I unlock the door and go to push our little cart in, when I look up and see someone dressed in scrubs standing in front of the door to our dry stock room. The way the kitchen is set up, when you open the door, I did, you could look straight back and see the dry stock entrance, the bread rack on the other side of that doorway, and the walk-in cooler behind it. This woman was standing in front of the bread rack facing the entrance to the dry stock room. I was confused because no one should have been in the kitchen, but in the time it took to look at my co-worker and then back up, she was gone. I didn't say anything. I just walked in and started looking around. She wasn't anywhere. Not the office, the stockroom, the walk-in, bathroom, cam room, nowhere. We didn't hear the bell on the back door, and it was still locked. My co-worker asked me what the hell I was doing, so I told her. I saw a nurse's aide in the kitchen. I described what she looked like because I hadn't seen her before. And when I finished, my co-worker looked shocked. She didn't say anything either before taking me back to the office and handing me an album. Our boss was like a mama and kept pictures of the staff in an album. And right there, a few pages in, was the woman I saw. She looked to be the same height, wearing colorful scrubs, with shoulder-length curly brown hair. So of course I'm like, okay, does she work here? Nope. She was the employee I replaced just a couple months prior. And I replaced her because she had a massive stroke and died in that very kitchen. 2. I work at a liquor store, a small, weird little store that was formerly a bottle depot. There's 2 floors, the top floor being an office space with a bathroom, and the first floor consisting of the sales floor, a huge backroom cooler where we store the beer, and the receiving room at the very back of the store. All of these areas are relevant to the story. There's also a large inn next door, but I'll talk more about that later. I like working at this store. The location means that we don't get many customers, save for the odd trucker or inn patron. Myself being quite introverted, it's nice just to be able to sit back with a book and get some time to myself. However, the store always sort of creeped me out, especially the back room. I'm not too sure why. I guess it's because it's very large and with no sound other than the AC units, keeping the beer refrigerated. But it always gave me the feeling that someone was watching me. Well, last night, about an hour and a half before closing, I was doing my usual duties of washing floors and pulling bottles forward. There were no customers in the store, and there was no sound other than the radio. Suddenly, I heard someone whistle a tune. It wasn't a specific song, just 3 seemingly random notes. I knew it couldn't be a song on the radio, because I had already heard the same song play earlier in the day. It was also too clear to have come from outside. I was a little creeped out, but I moved on pretty quickly. About 15 minutes later, I went to put the mop bucket back in the receiving room, the room that freaks me out the most, but unfortunately where the mop is stored. Upon entering the room, I heard the muffled sound of a woman's voice, very brief, not loud enough for me to hear what she said. I only heard it once, but I didn't stick around long enough to hear it again. Quickly dumping the bucket and getting out of there. Finally, at closing time, I did all my closing duties, cashing out the till, turning off the lights, all that good stuff. I was still pretty disturbed at the stuff I heard earlier, so I was excited to leave. Before leaving, I went upstairs to get changed and to use the bathroom. Now, something I forgot to mention is that on the top floor there's a small window that overlooks the back room. Curiosity got the better of me, and after using the washroom I figured I'd take a quick peek in the window to see if someone was in there. I didn't even make it all the way to the window when I heard a very loud thud like a large heavy book being dropped, coming from a small room on the top floor. Well, needless to say, I was out of there. I ran downstairs, grabbed my stuff, turned off the rest of the lights, armed the alarm, locked the door, and hightailed it to my car. I'm not sure if anyone had died at the former bottle depot, but what I do know for sure is this. At the inn next door, a woman was found dead, wrist slit, in a bathtub in one of the rooms. I don't know the whole story, but from what I read online, it was found to be a murder rather than a suicide. So what do you guys think? Did the woman's presence come over to my store? Or am I paranoid? 3. I grew up in a Christian home. My mom goes to church. My auntie is the pastor of her own church. Very strong Christian woman, I might add. Her sister as well. That'll become relevant later on. First of all, I want to say that what I'm about to say absolutely happened. A few weeks ago, I was a very sinful man. I still am, but I pray now and renounce my sinful ways. I started having nightmares of my wife and son turning into demons, or being chased by one. And I'd always hear music too. Like as if grey and black had a sound. I can't explain it. Then I started feeling pokes on my back. The same spot over and over. At the time I thought it was a muscle spasm. Then I'd have a sore back, for no reason whatsoever. I'm a very fit guy too. I ran 3 miles with a 30-pound vest 3 days ago and I'm fine. So I get into a fight with my wife and she tells me to leave because I'm being a dick more so than usual. Doing that, I take $10 to go have a toke. I know what you're thinking. Normie is having a THC freakout. The way I used weed was to explore my subconscious mind, figure out stuff my sober self wouldn't. And I would better myself through that. Anyways, me and my pals are trying out the new bong one of my mates bought. I take the fattest hit ever, and I start having a bad trip. Probably because of the environment and my situation at home with the wife. I start overthinking shit, and how I'm such a bad fucking person. So I walk over to my mom's house. Keep in mind I live in a small town with 3 stores, 1 clinic, 2 schools, 3 churches, and a whole lot of drug dealers. I walk in my mom's house and I start confessing everything to her. All my secrets I've ever held on to for so many years. About cheating, stealing, lying, self-fornicating. I ask her to start praying, but I feel like it doesn't work. So I ask if we can go to see my auntie, the one who runs the local church, as mentioned earlier. She has more authority over these things. But what luck. She's not at home or the church, so we go look for her at her sister's, which is 5 kilometers away. The thing too was nature wasn't nice that day. We live on a swamp, so half our roads are dirt, and the snow was just melting. On the ride there, I start getting scared, like the most scared I've ever been in my entire life. I didn't want to look in the mirror because I felt something behind me. I started praying, asking for forgiveness and whatnot. That's when my vision started getting disoriented, and my speech skills were almost like someone with Tourette's. Every time I tried to talk to my mom about something during the ride to my auntie's, I'd swear every 2 seconds. I couldn't help it, like I was being hijacked. By the time we got to my auntie's house, we started talking about my confessions and what I was feeling at that very moment. We started praying, all 3 of us, and it was so surreal. I started twitching and my vision made my mom look like her nose was longer and her eyes smaller. I swear for 1 second I see holes in my hands, which felt really blasphemous. This is where it gets good. Something inside me started getting angry, because I felt angry and I never felt a hate so ugly that day. The poking at my back became rapid fast, like it was trying to get my attention, so my auntie started praying in tongues. I still get tears thinking about this moment, because when she started doing so I felt like I was being fought over, like I was being tugged on both arms. I've never felt so hated and so loved at the same time. I wish I could say something exciting happened after that, like I started floating up in the air or having my head spin in circles. Instead, what happened was, whatever loved me won. I had tears running down my face. I no longer felt the poking on my back. I didn't feel so hated or ugly anymore. I pray and read the Bible now, and I'm working on being a better husband and father. It was scary back then, but it's actually something cool to think about now. I don't expect none of you to believe me, but I felt like I should tell you fellas my experience. Thanks for reading, and God bless. 4. In 2007, when I was 15, my family moved into a nice 3-story house built in the 1980s. I was excited to move to a new place and make new friends and just start fresh with school and with life. Anyway, a few weeks after we moved in, we started to notice some weird things happening in our home. Some of our belongings would be moved around to different places of the house. We'd occasionally hear footsteps when no one was walking around, and our dog would bark at random empty spaces in the rooms. Stuff like this happened for months. I used to joke to my friends about the house being haunted, even though at the time I didn't actually think it was. But about a year after we moved in, more intense things would happen. At one point, I was in my room when I heard a heavy breath sigh into my ear. At the same time, my bedroom doors slowly began to open. No one was there, of course. That's when I realized that our house definitely had an uninvited guest in it. But whatever it was didn't seem to be harmful in any way. So, to make myself less scared, I gave the ghost a name, Roger, and pretended he was just like a roommate. Fast forward to when I'm 17 years old. It was a Saturday night, and my parents went to their friend's house for drinks. They usually stay there pretty late, so I wasn't expecting them home until at least 1 a.m. My brother was staying at a friend's house, so my parents left me in charge of taking care of the animals. 11 p.m. rolls around, and I had already crated my dog for the night and was watching TV in the TV room. The TV room is directly across from my bedroom. I was lying on the couch watching TV when the door to the TV room swings open so fast and stops just as quickly. I can't explain it. There's no way it was a gust of wind. Not the way it stopped so suddenly. I actually jumped off the couch and stared at the door. I assumed it was my brother who came home from his friend's house and was playing a prank on me. "Alan?" I called out. "Hello?" There was no answer, so I walk over to the door. I stare across the hall, and in the doorway to my bedroom, just 10 feet from me, I saw the outline of a very tall, skinny man. Now, for those of you who have never been in a situation like this, I can only explain it as your mind being so terrified that your body takes over and you can hardly control your reaction. Well, my instant reaction was to hit the light switch in the hall, which was halfway between the two rooms. So yes, I ran towards the figure to turn the lights on. But I didn't tell myself to do it, I just did it like a reflex. Anyway, the light turned on, and suddenly there's no one in my doorway anymore. After a minute, I compose myself, trying to piece together what I saw. I slowly crept towards my room and turned the bedroom light on. No one was in my room, I thought. Maybe it was my brother. Maybe he somehow snuck past me in my state of terror when I jumped towards the light switch. So I decided to go down the hall to where my brother's room is. I'm calling out his name as I walk towards his room. I open his door and go to flip the light switch. But the lights didn't turn on. All you can see in the room is the faint moonlight coming through the windows. Well, I look up after failing to turn the lights on, and I see a big black shadowy figure quickly glide across the windows. My heart skipped a few beats, and this time my reflex was to run. I sprinted back down the hall and went into the TV room, closing the door behind me and locking it. I was starting to have a panic attack. I could barely breathe. I grabbed my phone and called my best guy friend, who lives just a few minutes away, much closer than where my parents and brother were that night. He picks up the phone and I'm gasping for air, trying to explain what happened. Wait, there's someone in your house? No, I don't know. I was gasping. I'm coming over. Less than 10 minutes later, my friend shows up, and I'm a little more put together. I explained to him exactly what I saw. We turned all the lights on in the house, let my dog out of her crate because I knew she would protect us if there was a real intruder in the house. And we went into every room of the house to make sure no one was there. We also went back to my brother's room, and lo and behold, the light switch worked this time. I swore to my friend that it didn't work before. And it's the only switch on the wall right there, so it's not like I was hitting the wrong switch. My friend stayed with me until my parents came home. I didn't even tell them what happened because I knew they wouldn't believe me. I refused to sleep in my bedroom for the next week or two because of what I saw, standing in the doorway that night. I slept in the TV room, with the door locked. A year later, at age 18, I went to college and moved out. And 7 years later to this day, when I visit my parents, I still feel like Roger the Ghost is there, watching me. 5. Back when I was a 5th grader, my grandparents bought a house for my uncle and his family. He was in the military and his wife worked as a house cleaner. They didn't have much income, hence my grandparents purchasing the house for them. It was an 80s, I think, split-level home, with stairs as soon as you walked inside the front door. The upstairs held a sitting room to the right and a hallway to the left. Straight ahead was the kitchen, a small attached dining area with sliding glass doors. The sliding glass doors opened to a room that had been added on, which we called the window room. It was wall-to-wall windows, used as the main living area. Going back down the hallway, you come to 2 bedrooms at the end and 1 bedroom to the left. 1 bathroom was there also on the right. The bathroom was strange. From the very moment I visited the house and walked into that bathroom for the first time, I got creeped out. It had mirrors covering every wall that had a gold flake marble effect on it. Something about it was just weird. Ugly, too. My uncle had 3 sons, which were at the time aged 11, 10, and 4. These cousins were like my brothers. I was the only girl cousin in the whole familial generation, but they were always very good with me and more sensitive than maybe your average males. I'm kind of rambling, so I'll just get to it. The basement was basically the kids' hangout. We always hung out down there and slept down there during sleepovers. They had a sofa on one side of the living area, and another sofa that was a pull-out bed on the other wall. As kids, you don't notice much, especially with a gang of kids around at all times. A consistent event, though, was that people would think they were being hit in their sleep. This happened to multiple people over a few years, but I always assumed my cousins were pranking each other, until I was accused of hitting someone. I personally never got hit in my sleep, but on the night I was accused, we had 5 people staying over. I shared the pull-out bed with a boy named Andrew. I had just dozed off when he jerked straight up, yelling at me for slapping him in the face. I insisted that I hadn't, but he didn't believe me. Like I said, though, as kids you brush things off. Now I'm going to flash forward to adulthood. I was pregnant at 19. My boyfriend and I lived together with my mom. She was in the midst of a troubled marriage to my stepfather, and one day decided to leave him. My uncle had moved out of the house my grandparents owned maybe a week before, so that is where we went. We ended up living in that house for several years after that. My relationship with my boyfriend had been a little bit of a struggle for the past 4 years when we moved in, but we were on the mend and planning to marry. Almost immediately after moving into the house, though, things took a turn for the worst. My boyfriend began to get violent with me on a regular basis. It started with pushing and small things like that, and eventually escalated to choking and threats that prompted neighbors to call police. Yes, this was during pregnancy, and yes, I did leave him when my son was 2. My uncle and his wife had faced a similar fate previously. My once benign uncle had become a drunken hermit, holding a gun to his head and threatening to commit suicide several times a year. Moving on to when my son was 3, I met a new guy. Because he was a loser, he immediately moved into the house with me. A fate quite similar awaited us. Things took a weird turn, and I felt like this boyfriend, whom I had known since 2nd grade, was suddenly a person I couldn't recognize. He, however, had different type of violent outbursts, which happened in his sleep. He would later be diagnosed with REM sleep disorder. It doesn't affect him anymore. In fact, upon moving out of the house, it stopped altogether. Which you may be thinking you'd wish I'd stop rambling and just get to all the paranormal stuff. This really sets the tone for how things were for those who lived in the house. Life took a dismal turn for people living there. I soon figured out, though, that maybe it wasn't just our house. The street was small, maybe 50 houses total. Typical middle-class subdivision in small-town Kentucky. So in the time span that my uncle and I lived in the house, here were some of the things that happened on our street. Husband stabs wife to death in home, 2 young daughters returning after school, get off, and find their mother dead in the house. Man, only 30 years old, dies of a burst heart, after using coke. Boy 8 dies of asthma attack. Woman 38 dies from a fall down basement stairs, and stays there for a couple of weeks until she is discovered. Man, middle-aged, 2 doors to the right of us, hangs himself in backyard. He was a preacher. I was standing outside my house smoking a cigarette when his wife found him. Her screams will never exit my mind. These are just a few of the things that happened on our street. Crazy, right? If people seriously want verification, I will try my best to find public records. Have you ever been dozing off and heard words whispered in your ear? I had 2 instances of that. One was a man who strangely said, "I'm stinking. I've been working with the horses all day." And the other was a female voice spitting out pure profanity. "Fucking bitch, kill yourself. Ugly fucking whore," etc. It was really scary, but I pretty much brushed those off as some kind of dream-induced state. Another thing that happened, and for some reason the most scary, was one late night, 3 a.m. or so. I was in the kitchen washing baby bottles. My kitchen had a window just above the sink, which looked out into the backyard. You can see the kitchen in the outline behind you when you're in front of that window at night, due to the poor light reflection. As I'm washing bottles, I see my boyfriend walk into the kitchen and stand behind me leaning against the wall. I began to talk about something I don't remember, but I got to a point in speaking where I had asked a question. When I garnered no response, I turned around, being an asshole, and said, "Hello?" And as you can probably guess, nobody was there. I checked the bedroom, and he and my son were fast asleep. Whatever it was just standing there watching me. Another time my boyfriend and I were sleeping, and his computer suddenly started blaring old music, like 1800s bluegrass. We ran in the adjacent room to turn off the computer so it wouldn't wake our son. But the screen was still off. The music stopped just as it had started, suddenly. This was in the year 2003, before the likes of Pandora and similar music streaming sites. The music was something I had never heard and sounded like it was being played in one of those big horn-looking things from back in the day. This happened a total of 3 times. Each time the same song. We never did find the source. One night I'm lying in bed, waiting on my boyfriend to get home from his second shift job. It's about 11 p.m. and I hear him trying to get into the bedroom. Our doorframe was messed up due to a previous bout of violence from a fight, in which he kicked the locked door in. It would occasionally get stuck and you'd have to rattle it to get it open. I leaned over to the door, and as soon as my hand met the knob, it stopped rattling. I opened the door and, yeah, nobody. He hasn't gotten home yet. I have so many small stories like this, but I couldn't possibly type them all now. I will finish with the mother of all of them. I saw a man. I was lying in bed and got up to turn my light off, and just as I looked out the bedroom door, a man was walking down the hall. He was silent. No creaking footsteps like you'd usually hear from someone walking down the hall. He didn't look my way, just kept walking. He turned the corner to go into that creepy bathroom until he was out of sight. I saw a man. I was freaking out some, but not as much as I had imagined I would if something like that ever happened to me. He was probably about 55 to 60, grey hair, wrinkled face, thin to medium build, short only about 5'7", and was wearing a blue work uniform like a mechanic or something. I guess the only thing I didn't see were his feet. He looked sad. As I said, I have so many small stories that I couldn't possibly list them all here. But here's something I found in doing some research years after moving out. Our house, along with most in our neighborhood, had been built using recycled bricks from a prison in our town that was shut down in the 70s, I think maybe early 80s. In the south side of our city we had an underground prison. These were the bricks. I thought maybe it could explain all the bad juju on our street. Who knows? Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 43. Thanks very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'm very fortunate that right now I have got lots of paranormal stories to choose from, but I will try to keep sending out messages and keeping that collection built up in the upcoming weeks. Right now I'm getting way more paranormal stories than I am regular stories, so we'll just keep that going so I've got a reserve of something that I can use on the slower weeks. I gotta say, it's been one of those bloody awkward recording nights. I guess it's because I'm recording a little earlier than I usually would now. Oftentimes I might record about 11, 12 o'clock, sometimes even later, and it would generally be quieter then. But because I'm recording earlier, I've got to put up with all the annoying sounds of your normal neighbourhood. The kind of thing that isn't really that annoying, generally speaking. But when you're sitting down in front of a microphone, You know every little sound that's going to be picked up by that microphone, so when your neighbours are next door, doing whatever they're doing next door, it's, you find yourself on edge at things that wouldn't usually bother you at all. But still, recording earlier technically means I can get finished earlier. Or also means I can take a lot longer to do it and take lengthy breaks in between stories, which is actually a good thing if you're doing a few videos at once. Puts less strain in the all voice box if you let things rest in between. Which is actually what I'm going to go do now. I'm going to go get a snack of some kind and be lazy for a bit, then I'll get to the editing of things. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.